That night, the apartment door swung wide. He entered without knocking, his eyes finding the fresh bruise on my cheek. He spoke calmly. "Do you want to take back everything that is yours?" My stepmother stood frozen. She didn't know this silver-haired man was the hidden control of Vellum Biofoods. Where she'd just pushed me to the edge, I nodded. He smiled. "Then tomorrow, you go to work as usual." My name is Mara Quinn. I am 29 years old. And my job title, Ethics and Compliance Analyst at Vellum Biofoods, is a contradiction in terms. In Ridgemont, a city that worships the sleek aesthetic of doing good while doing well. Vellum is the cathedral. We package sustainable, plant-based futures into climate-controlled containers. My job was to make sure the legal fine print matched the messianic ad copy. It required a high tolerance for polite fiction and an even higher tolerance for my stepmother. The argument, like most arguments with Celeste, began with a whisper and ended with a detonation. It wasn't the supply chain report, not at first. It was the way I'd loaded the dishwasher. "You're distracted, Mara," she said. Her voice, usually a smooth, HR-approved murmur, had a serrated edge. "You've been sloppy all week. This isn't your dorm room." I kept my back to her, focusing on the rhythmic clink of glass on the rack. "I'm just tired, Celeste." "Tired," she mused, stepping into my peripheral vision. She was a vision in cream-colored cashmere, smelling faintly of expensive jasmine. "Or guilty?" I stopped. I turned. The kitchen was her showroom, white marble, stainless steel, cold underfoot. "Guilty of what?" She tapped a long, manicured finger on her phone, which was resting on the island. HR received a flag, an anonymous ethics report, concerning the new logistics provider in the cold chain. She paused, letting the words hang in the sterile air. "My provider, the one I negotiated." The analyst in me took over, a cold, familiar click. If a report was filed, it's anonymous by definition. I wouldn't know anything about it. "Don't lie to me in my own house." The veneer cracked. The volume was shocking in the quiet space. "You bypassed me. You bypassed your father. You went straight to the whistleblower hotline with some fantasy about—" "What? Labor insurance?" "It's not a fantasy," I said, my voice dropping to the register I used in hostile depositions. "The subcontractor's insurance policy is non-compliant with the new federal guidelines. If one of those trucks crashes, or a driver gets hurt, Vellum is entirely exposed. We'd be—" "I know what we'd be," she hissed, stepping closer. The jasmine smell was suffocating. "We'd be fine. I had it handled. It was a simple paperwork lag. But you couldn't stand it, could you? You couldn't stand not being the smartest person in the room. This isn't about being smart, Celeste. It's about protecting the company." "The company?" she spat. "You stupid, arrogant girl. I am the Executive Vice President of Human Resources and External Affairs. I am the company's public face. You didn't protect anyone. You just started a fire I now have to put out. You jeopardized your father's position. You betrayed this family." "The report wasn't about family," I said, the words tasting like metal. "It was about a clear violation, or perhaps," I added, the cold fury finally surfacing, "it was about the very specific performance bonus tied to your efficient Q4 rollout." That was the line. Her hand moved so fast I didn't register the intent until the impact. It wasn't a panicked, desperate swing. It was a strike, calculated, controlled, and vicious. The sound was sharp, dry, and absolute. It was the sound of a circuit breaking, the sound of a single match being struck and immediately, violently, extinguished. My vision flared white at the edges. A blooming electric heat exploded across my left cheek, radiating from the bone. The shock was colder than the pain, a sudden, icy understanding of what had just happened. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my face. The skin was already tightening, the pulse beneath it roaring in my ears. My phone was on the counter, next to the sink. I grabbed it. My thumb went straight to the keypad, hovering over the 9 and the 1. 911. Report an assault. I saw the narrative flash, crisp and clear as a vellum press release. The police report, the domestic dispute, the inevitable, hushed questions at work. Who is she? Your stepmother. And also your EVP? I would become a story, a liability, a weeping, unstable woman in a messy kitchen, telling armed strangers that her stepmother hit her over a corporate filing. I saw the look on Celeste's face. She was breathing hard, her eyes bright, almost daring me. She would welcome the call. It would frame me as hysterical. It would turn a professional, documented compliance breach into a pathetic, emotional family squabble. I will not be a crying story. I lowered the phone. My breath was ragged, but my hand was perfectly steady. I slid my thumb across the screen, opened the camera app, and switched it to video. I pressed record, letting the microphone activate. I set the phone face down on the granite counter, the lens obscured, but the microphone was live. What in God's name is going on in here? My father, Daniel Quinn, stood in the arched doorway that led to the living room. He was holding his reading glasses. He looked, as he always did, like a man who had just been woken from a nap he didn't want. He looked from the angry, blossoming red mark on my face to Celeste's rigid posture. His gaze faltered. "Daniel, thank God," Celeste said, her voice instantly transforming, becoming a wounded, controlled tremor. "Your daughter, she's completely unraveled. She filed a baseless, malicious report against me at work. When I tried to ask her about it, calmly, she became aggressive. She threatened my career." The lie was so bald, so magnificent in its audacity, it almost took my breath away. I stared at him. Aggressive? "Mara?" he asked. His eyes wouldn't meet mine. They focused on the floor, on the grout lines between the expensive tiles. He was a man drowning in obligations, clinging to the anchor. "She hit me, Dad." My voice was flat. "I barely touched her. She lunged," Celeste cried. "She's trying to deflect. She is sabotaging us. Us, Daniel." My father ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. He was a special projects consultant at Vellum, a comfortable, six-figure sinecure that Celeste had procured for him after his own consulting business had quietly failed. His salary was high. His mortgage, on this very apartment, was higher. He was a man perpetually caught between his debts and his shame. He looked at me, his gaze finally lifting. It was pleading. Don't rock the boat. Don't make me choose." His silence was the second strike, and it landed harder than the first. It was the definitive proof of his captivity. The debt he owed her was more tangible, more pressing, than the blood he shared with me. And that was when the apartment door swung open. It didn't just open. It was thrust wide, bouncing off the doorstop with a muffled, heavy thud that vibrated through the floor. No knock, no buzz from the lobby. The wind from the hallway swirled in, cold and sharp, smelling of the city night, damp wool, and something ancient, like cedar. He stood in the entryway, framed by the jaundiced light of the hall. Augustus Hale, my maternal grandfather. He was not a large man, but he occupied space with an unyielding gravity. He wore a dark cashmere topcoat, unbuttoned, draped over a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. He seemed to absorb the light in the room. He smelled of that cedar and old leather, a scent so profoundly out of place in Celeste's sterile, lemon and ammonia-scented kitchen that it felt like a chemical reaction. He didn't look at me, not first. His eyes, a pale, piercing blue I hadn't seen in 5 years, did a slow, methodical sweep of the room. They were analysts' eyes. They catalogued the overturned water glass by the sink. They noted Celeste, poised like a cobra ready to strike again. They noted my father, Daniel, who seemed to be shrinking into the drywall, his face ashen. Then, finally, his gaze landed on me. He took in the hand I still held to my face, the raw, red imprint of Celeste's fingers, which was already beginning to darken. He moved. He walked past Celeste as if she were a piece of poorly chosen furniture. He walked past my father as if he were a ghost. He stopped at the massive marble island and slowly, deliberately, placed a heavy, old-fashioned brass keyring on the counter. The sound of solid metal hitting polished stone was brutally loud in the sudden, absolute silence. It wasn't a clink, it was a clang, it was a gavel. A declaration. "Ta la Augustus hail," he said. His voice was not loud. It was soft, almost conversational, with a faint, old-world accent I couldn't place, yet it cut through the tension like a diamond. Celeste, thrown off balance by the sheer audacity of the intrusion, regained her HR-trained composure. "I'm sorry. This is a private residence. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now, or I will call security." Augustus turned his head, just slightly. He regarded her. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of mild, academic curiosity, the way a biologist might study a particularly uninteresting insect before pinning it to a board. "I am Augustus Hale," he repeated, as if speaking to a child who was failing a simple test. "And you, madam, have just made the most expensive mistake of your entire life." Celeste actually laughed, a short, sharp, nervous sound that died almost instantly. "I don't know who you think you are. You are Celeste Quinn, ne Rosales," he continued, his voice a smooth, uninterrupted monotone. "EVP of Human Resources and External Affairs for Vellum Biofoods. You pushed through the Kratos Logistics contract on April 12th, overriding 2 red flags from the Internal Audit Committee. You did this by hiding the primary liability under a shell LLC registered in Delaware. A shell you failed to disclose was managed by your cousin. You did this to secure a Q4 performance bonus tied to a 40% cost reduction in supply chain logistics." Celeste's face went from pale to a waxy, translucent gray. The blood drained from it so fast she looked like a marble statue. "And you," he said, his gaze shifting, pinning my father to the wall, "are Daniel Quinn. You have been leveraging your wife's unvested stock options to cover margin calls on 3 over-leveraged commercial properties in the downtown corridor. You are, in legal and practical terms, hopelessly compromised." My father slid down the wall into a kitchen chair, his mouth open, making no sound. Augustus turned back to Celeste. "I know this, because I am the primary silent partner in the Hale Rivers Fund, and the Hale Rivers Fund, through 3 legally distinct holding companies, controls 8% of Vellum Biofoods. I am, in effect, your boss, and you just assaulted my granddaughter in front of me." The silence that followed was no longer silence. It was a vacuum, pulling all the air, all the sound, all the arrogance from the room. Celeste stood frozen, her mind visibly, painfully, trying to catch up to the bomb that had just detonated. She hadn't known. Of course she hadn't. My grandfather, the rich old recluse my mother had broken from, was a ghost, a myth I never spoke of. He looked back at me, the coldness in his eyes softening, just fractionally. "Mara," he said, the voice calm, "do you want to take back everything that is yours?" I looked past him, at Celeste, who was shaking, her mask of competence shattered. I looked at my father, who had his head in his hands, steeped in his own suffocating shame. I nodded once, a single, sharp dip of my chin. A very thin, very cold smile touched Augustus Hale's lips. "Good," he said. "Then tomorrow, you go to work as usual." The spell was broken. Celeste made a small, choking sound. "Go get some ice for that," Augustus said to me, his voice gentle now, an order disguised as a kindness. I moved. My legs felt strangely steady, as if they were suddenly made of steel. I pulled a soft-sided ice pack from the freezer. The blue gel was frigid, and when I pressed it to my cheek, the searing pain subsided into a dull, throbbing ache. It anchored me. When I turned back, Augustus had retrieved a small, worn, leather-bound notebook and a heavy gold-nibbed pen from his coat pocket. He flipped it open to a clean page, ignoring the 2 other adults disintegrating in his presence. He wrote one line, his handwriting a sharp, elegant, antiquated script. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Emergency internal shareholder meeting. Agenda. Item 4.b. Officer malfeasance. He tore the page out, folded it precisely, and slid it into his vest pocket. He looked at me, his eyes clear and hard. The car is waiting downstairs. We'll stay at the City Club tonight. I didn't pack a bag. I walked to the counter and picked up my phone. Stopping the recording, I saved the file. I looked at the blue ice pack in my other hand, a flimsy piece of plastic. I looked at the man who was my father, still hiding his face from the judgment he deserved. I looked at the woman who had built her petty kingdom on intimidation, now staring blankly at a set of brass keys on her precious marble counter. I understood. Then, the line I had refused to cross, the line of becoming a victim, of crying for help, of letting them reduce me to a family problem, was gone. It hadn't just been moved. It had been obliterated. A new line had been drawn tonight. It was not a boundary, it was a starting pistol. My grandfather had watched me endure. He had watched me bend to my father's weakness and Celeste's ambition. Tonight, he had watched me nearly break, and he had decided, in that precise, calculated way of his, that endurance was no longer the objective. Calculation was. I dropped the ice pack into the stainless steel sink. The plastic made a flat, wet, final sound. "I'm ready," I said. Augustus nodded. He walked to the door, holding it open for me, a silent, courteous gesture that was also an expulsion. He didn't look back at the wreckage in the kitchen. Neither did I. Vellum Biofoods is a perfect company on paper. Our official mission statement, carved into a slab of reclaimed redwood in the lobby, is to ethically nourish the global community. We are green. We are humane. We are transparent. We sell high-protein, algae-based meat alternatives and cold-pressed nutrient gels in packaging made from compostable cornstarch. We sponsor urban gardens, fund scholarships for agricultural science, and our CEO gives TED Talks about conscious capitalism. Inside, Vellum is a machine engineered for one purpose: relentless, uncompromising profit. The green is the color of the balance sheet. The humane applies only to the projected Q3 earnings, and transparency is a marketing term, a buzzword used in press releases, deployed with surgical precision by my stepmother, Celeste Quinn, the Executive Vice President of Human Resources and External Affairs. Celeste curated the Vellum brand. She was the architect of our public sainthood. She approved the ad campaigns showing smiling, diverse families eating our synthetic bacon. She also handled internal cultural alignment, which was a beautiful, sterile euphemism for ensuring that everyone in the company either towed the line or was quietly and efficiently shown the door. My job was to be the exception. As an ethics and compliance analyst, I didn't report to a department head. I reported, in theory, to the General Counsel and the Audit Committee. My specific territory was supplier contracts. I was the person who read the 8-point font, the person who cross-referenced insurance binders and labor certifications from our third-party vendors. I was the backstop. I was the one paid to find the single sentence that could cost the company $100 million in a lawsuit. My role was a necessary legal evil. Celeste's role was to ensure I never actually found anything big enough to disrupt the quarterly projections. We were oil and water, forced to occupy the same glass. Our battleground was the Ridgemont Tower. The lobby is a 3-story atrium of glass and brushed steel. Sunlight streams in, illuminating the towering, 40-foot ficus trees that are swapped out by a specialty landscaping firm the moment a single leaf turns yellow. A massive digital waterfall cascades down one wall, displaying inspiring quotes from ecological poets, and hanging from the ceiling, suspended by invisible wires so it appears to float, is the company motto, rendered in clean, sans serif, recycled aluminum. Feed the future. It hangs there like a promise, but it always felt to me like a threat, a command. The future is hungry, and it's our job to monetize it, no matter the cost to the present. My father, Daniel, had his own place in this ecosystem. He was a special projects consultant, It was a title that meant nothing and everything. It meant he had a beautiful corner office on the 14th floor, a generous expense account, and no direct reports. He attended meetings, nodded sagely, and produced memos on strategic synergy that were polite, well-written, and universally ignored. He was paid a very high salary for one specific service: his convenient, total, and profound silence. He was the living symbol of Celeste's power, the husband she had installed in the corporate palace as both a trophy and a warning. The culture at Vellum is driven by what our CEO calls relentless velocity. We don't have meetings. We have sprints. We don't have problems. We have growth opportunities. And we certainly don't have time for rules. Compliance in this environment is seen as drag, bureaucratic lag, a friction point. I was the friction. The Kratos logistics contract landed on my digital desk 3 weeks ago. It was a massive deal, part of Celeste's much-lauded Q4 supply chain optimization initiative. It was meant to consolidate our entire refrigerated trucking fleet under one new, aggressive vendor. It promised a 40% cost reduction. I spent 2 days reading it. On paper, it was perfect. Kratos was certified carbon neutral, a certification I quickly found they had purchased from a shell company in Panama. Their fleet was new, their routing software was AI-driven, and then, on page 87, Appendix C, Section 4.B, I found it. The clause on workers' compensation and vehicular liability insurance. It was beautifully written, full of soothing legal jargon, but it contained a subclause I had never seen before. It stipulated that while Kratos held the master policy, all third-party overflow contractors, the drivers they would inevitably hire during peak season, were classified as independent gig operators and were responsible for securing their own primary liability insurance. Vellum, the clause stated, would be held harmless and fully indemnified against any claims arising from these non-employees. It was a time bomb. It meant that the dozens, possibly hundreds of drivers hauling our temperature-sensitive, perishable products in massive 18-wheel trucks would be doing so with whatever cheap, state minimum insurance they could get, if they got any at all. If one of them jackknifed on a highway and caused a 10-car pileup, Vellum's indemnification would collapse under the first serious legal challenge. The media wouldn't care about a subclause in Appendix C. They would see the Vellum logo on the side of a burning truck and a driver with no health insurance. I did my job. I flagged the clause in red, wrote a concise 3-paragraph memo detailing the precise legal and financial exposure, running into the hundreds of millions in potential damages, and recommended we reject the contract until Kratos amended the policy to cover all drivers under their corporate umbrella. I addressed the email to my direct supervisor, the General Counsel. 5 minutes later, the email bounced back. 550, user unknown. I stared at the screen. User unknown? I'd emailed him that morning. I checked the spelling. It was correct. I tried again. 550, user unknown. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I opened my sent folder to find the original email, to forward it to the head of the audit committee instead. It wasn't there. The email I had sent and the undeliverable reply had both vanished. Not in my trash folder, not in spam. They were gone, as if they had never existed. Someone with system-wide administrative privileges had just intercepted and erased a formal compliance report from a firewalled server. Someone had just, in effect, burned the evidence. There are only 3 people at Vellum with that level of IT access: the CTO, the CEO, and the EVP of Human Resources, who also controlled all internal security protocols. I sat back, the hum of the server rack in my cubicle suddenly deafening. This wasn't a paperwork lag. This was a deliberate, high-level cover-up. I didn't get a chance to decide my next move. An instant message popped up on my screen. From Celeste. My office. Now. Her office is on the 19th floor, the executive floor. It's twice the size of my apartment, with a wall of glass overlooking the Ridgemont skyline. I walked in. She was standing by the window, not looking at me. You look stressed. Mara, she said, her voice a calm, smooth purr. I have a heavy workload. Yes. You've been very diligent. She turned, a perfect, polished smile on her face, the corporate mask. I wanted to talk to you about the Kratos contract. I saw you were running analytics on it. I saw you. The words were a casual, chilling admission. She had been watching my activity. I found a significant liability in the insurance clause, I said, keeping my voice flat. Yes, the third-party driver clause. She waved a dismissive hand. A minor formatting issue. Legal is handling it. It's not a formatting issue. Celeste, it's a critical flaw in the chain of liability. It's non-compliant. I can't sign off on it. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. They were the eyes of a shark. You're not being asked to sign off on it, dear. You're being asked to understand it. This initiative is vital to our Q4 projections. It's vital to the company's health. It's vital to this family's health. She walked to her desk, a massive, sterile white slab of imported Italian marble. She picked up a framed photo. It was of her and my father, beaming on a sailboat. Your father loves his work here, she said softly. He feels productive, valued. It's given him a new lease on life after his little business failures. She put the photo down, her finger tracing the frame. It would be a tragedy if the company's health forced us to reconsider non-essential roles. In a downturn, consultants are always the first to go. The threat was unmistakable. My silence, in exchange for my father's job. Family first, work second, she said, the smile returning, full of warmth and venom. We take care of our own, Mara, don't we? I looked at her, at the picture of my smiling, captured father. I thought of the anonymous driver who would be financially ruined, or worse, if he got into an accident. It's because of family that I won't sign, I said. My grandmother taught me that you don't build a house on rotten foundations. Celeste's smile vanished. The mask was off. You are making a very, very big mistake, she whispered. That was at 4 p.m. At 8 p.m. I was in my kitchen, arguing about that very report. At 8:03 p.m., her hand cracked across my face. At 8:04 p.m., she threatened my job directly, demanding I voluntarily resign by morning, or she would have me fired for gross insubordination and fabricating a malicious report against an executive. And at 8:05 p.m., Augustus Hale walked through the door he hadn't bothered to knock on. He hadn't just saved me from another blow. He hadn't just exposed Celeste's petty, pathetic tyranny. He had taken my small, lonely, bureaucratic fight, my single, deleted email, and my principled, useless stand, and handed me a declaration of war, my story, which was supposed to end in a quiet HR file labeled Voluntary Resignation, had just become a campaign, and my grandfather, the ghost I thought had abandoned me, had just shown up to be my general. The drive to the Ridgemont City Club was silent. The car wasn't a flashy limousine. It was an old, dark green Bentley, impeccably maintained, that smelled exactly like my grandfather's coat, cedar and leather. It moved through the city streets with a heavy, soundless grace, insulating us from the world outside. I held the ice pack to my cheek, the initial shock wearing off, replaced by a dull, pulsing throb. The bruise was no longer a hot, sharp pain. It was a cold, heavy fact. Augustus didn't speak. He didn't ask if I was all right. He didn't offer platitudes. He simply sat beside me, his profile outlined by the passing streetlights, his hands resting on a worn leather briefcase in his lap. He was watching the city pass, but I knew he wasn't seeing it. He was processing, calculating, moving pieces on a board I hadn't known existed. The Ridgemont City Club was a place I'd only seen from the outside, a monolith of gray stone and dark, polished wood, a relic from an era of robber barons and backroom deals. We were shown to a suite on an upper floor without the formality of checking in. The air was still, the furniture heavy and dark. Augustus set his briefcase on a massive mahogany desk. He clicked it open. "Pour yourself a drink, Mara," he said, not looking at me. "There's a decanter on the bar. Water." He wasn't asking. I poured a glass of water, my hand steady. The ice clinked against the crystal. The sound was too loud. "You have questions," he stated, pulling a file from his case. It was thick, bound in dark blue. "You're Augustus Hale," I said, my voice hoarse. "My mother told me you were a history professor. She said you disowned her when she married my father." "I was a professor," he said, sitting in the high-backed leather desk chair, "of economic history, and I never disowned your mother. She disagreed with my assessment of your father's character. She was a romantic. I am not." He tapped the file. "Your grandmother, however, was a pragmatist. When she died, she left her half of our assets to me, in trust, with one instruction, to not interfere in your life unless your choices were being taken from you." "And tonight?" "Tonight," he said, his pale blue eyes meeting mine. "You were no longer making a choice. You were being forced into a corner. You were being beaten for doing your job. That is unacceptable." He paused. "Your grandmother was very specific. She said I would know the moment. This," he gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the apartment we'd left behind, "was the moment. It is enough." He pushed the blue file across the desk. "You know me as your grandfather, the world, the parts of it that matter. Know me as the Hale in the Hale Rivers Fund." I stared at the name on the cover. Hale Rivers. I knew that name. Everyone in finance knew that name. It was a ghost, a notoriously private, deeply influential private equity fund that specialized in long-term, stable growth investments. They were known for buying significant minority stakes in companies and then doing nothing. They were the ultimate passive investors, or so the journal claimed. "The fund," he continued, his voice a flat, precise monotone, "was co-founded by myself and Eleanor Rivers, your grandmother. It is our life's work. Our primary holdings are in infrastructure, agriculture, and biotechnology." He opened the file. Inside was a complex, multi-page flowchart of holding companies. "Vellum Biofoods looked promising 20 years ago," he said, tapping a box at the bottom of the chart. "A good idea. Weak leadership, but a solid, defensible patent on their protein extraction process. We took an 8% equity position, funneled through 3 different legal shells to avoid attracting attention. It was your grandmother's passion project. 8% at Vellum's current market capitalization. That was..." My mind spun. It was a staggering amount of money. It was a seat at the table. It was leverage. "Celeste doesn't know," I whispered, the realization dawning. "Of course not," Augustus said dismissively. "Our holdings are registered to a trust managed by a law firm in Zurich. The proxy votes are cast by our lawyers, always in line with the board's recommendations. We are, on paper, the perfect silent partner. We collect dividends. We don't make waves, until now." He retrieved a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. It was heavy, cream-colored bond, with an embossed letterhead. He signed it at the bottom with the same gold-nibbed pen from the kitchen. "This," he said, sliding it over to me, "is a letter of temporary proxy. It assigns the voting rights of the Hale Rivers Fund's entire 3.4 million shares of Vellum stock to you. It is effective as of 9 a.m. tomorrow. At the opening of the emergency shareholders meeting I am currently in the process of calling." I read the words, "Mara Quinn, as designated proxy for Hale Rivers Fiduciary Trust." "Me?" I looked up, the weight of it settling on me. I'm an analyst. I'm on the verge of being fired. They won't let me in the room." "They will," he said. "The meeting has been called in accordance with the corporate bylaws. Article 2, Section 3. An emergency meeting may be called by any shareholder or group of shareholders holding more than 5% of outstanding stock. We hold 8. They are legally required to convene." He pulled another sheet from the file. It was a simple list of names. "You are not alone. You are just the one with the shares. We have allies. You don't get to my age without collecting a few." He tapped the first name. Arthur Wembley. He sat on the board for 20 years, headed the audit committee. Celeste. He said her name as if it were something spoiled. Pushed him out last year. Convinced the board he was too conservative for our relentless velocity culture. He was replaced by a tech bro halfwit who thinks an audit is a software problem. Arthur has been waiting for a reason to challenge the new guard. He still holds 1.2% of the stock. He tapped the second name. Dr. Lila Vance. She's the board's science representative. She believes in the Vellum mission, the real mission, not the marketing copy. She's been furious about the shift from R&D to aggressive marketing for months. Celeste cut her research budget and diverted it to external affairs. Dr. Yi Vance is an angel investor from the first round. She holds 0.8%. Wembley and Vance, I said. That's 2%, plus your 8. That's 10% of the company. 10% is a foothold, Augustus said. But it is not, by itself, a victory. A boardroom is not a democracy. Mara, it is a court, and in a court, you do not win by being the loudest. You win by having the best records. He steepled his fingers, his pale eyes fixed on me. So, you were hit? Your boss, your stepmother, threatened you. A clear case of workplace harassment, retaliation, and assault. A good lawyer could make a colorful case, but that is not our primary move. That is noise. We will win on the merits. We will win on your work. Show me. Show you what? The records, the significant liability you found, the reason she hit you. I want to see the fuse you lit. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I pulled my laptop from my messenger bag. I'd had the presence of mind to grab it before we left. I booted it up, bypassed the Vellum VPN, and logged into my personal, encrypted cloud drive. I knew they might try to lock me out of the system, I explained, my voice clinical, the analyst taking over. After my email was intercepted and erased, I took precautions. Intercepted and erased? His eyes sharpened. Go on. I made a full copy of the Kratos contract and a mirror of the server logs from my workstation for the past 72 hours. It's all time-stamped. I pulled up the documents, turning the laptop for him to see. Here, page 87, the insurance clause. It indemnifies Vellum, but it shifts primary liability to independent gig operators, a classification that violates state and federal labor laws. It's wage theft, disguised as a liability shield, and it's illegal. My initial projection, I pulled up a spreadsheet, puts Vellum's immediate exposure at a minimum of $120 million in regulatory fines before a single lawsuit is even filed. Augustus was silent. He read the clause. He read it again. He scanned my financial projection. He nodded, a small, impressed, almost imperceptible gesture. And the erasure? Here, I pulled up the system log. This is the metadata from the Vellum email server. At 16:04, my email is sent to the General Counsel. At 16:09, it is intercepted and deleted. The deletion command did not originate from the GC's terminal. It originated from an administrative-level IP address. Whose address? It's masked, I said. But the admin privileges used, the ones that can erase an email from a firewalled compliance server, are assigned to only 3 people. Augustus took his gold pen from his pocket. He didn't write in his notebook. He took a piece of the hotel's stationery and wrote 3 names. CEO, Thompson. CTO, Sharma. EVP, HR and Ext, Affairs, C. Quinn. Thompson is a fool, but he's not a technician, Augustus mused, crossing off the CEO's name. Sharma, the CTO, is a rules-based coward. He wouldn't dare interfere with a compliance flag. He'd forward it to the whole board to cover his own ass. He drew a single, heavy, dark-inked arrow, pointing directly from the administrative command to the third name, C. Quinn. He looked up at me. She didn't just try to hide a contract. She actively, personally, and traceably destroyed a formal compliance report. That is not just officer malfeasance, that is a federal crime. My blood ran cold. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Section 802, willful destruction of corporate audit records. Precisely, Augustus said. He leaned back. The plan was clear in his eyes. This is the plan, he said, as if reading my mind. We do not go into that meeting tomorrow shouting about assault. We do not speak of family. We do not speak of your father's debts. That is her ammunition. We will not use it. We go in as shareholders. You, as proxy for Hale Rivers, will make a formal motion. You will not move to fire her. That would be messy. A he said, she said. No, you will move, based on the evidence of this contract. He tapped the laptop. And this log. He tapped the stationery. To demand an immediate, expanded, independent internal audit of the entire Q4 supply chain optimization initiative, and of all executive administrative access logs for the past 6 months. Wembley and Dr. Vance will second the motion, I said, following the logic. They will. The board will be forced to vote. If they vote no, they are complicit in the cover-up. If they vote yes, the independent auditors will find exactly what you found, and more. What about Celeste? I asked. Part 2 of the motion, he said, a cold smile touching his lips. You will move that, in accordance with standard corporate governance. Any and all officers who are the subject of the audit, namely, Celeste Quinn, be placed on temporary, paid administrative suspension, with all system access revoked, pending the outcome of the audit. It was brilliant. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, procedural request. It was bloodless. It was brutal. It was a scalpel, aimed directly at the heart of her power. They will fight it, I said. Let them, Augustus said. Let them put on the official record that they refuse to investigate a multi-million-dollar liability and a potential federal crime, all to protect her. Let them explain that to the press and to the SEC. He closed his briefcase. The brass latches clicked shut. Celeste's mistake, he said, was believing that Vellum was her company. She believed the marketing. She forgot that a corporation is, at its core, a legal and financial document, and you, Mara, just proved you read the document more closely than she did. He stood up, walking to the window, looking down at the sleeping city. Tomorrow, he said, his back to me. You go to work as usual. You will sit at your desk. You will answer your emails. You will wait for the 9 a.m. meeting invitation. You will walk into that boardroom. You will present your findings. He turned, his face half in shadow. Your usual has just been redefined. You are no longer the friction. Mara, you are the hand on the emergency brake. I arrived at 8 o'clock. The bruise on my left cheek was a developing, ugly flower, a constellation of purple, blue, and sickening yellow. I had applied a thin layer of concealer, not to hide it, but to fulfill the basic requirements of professionalism. It was useless. The bruise was a statement. It was a uniform. I walked through the glass and steel atrium. The massive, 40-foot ficus trees were perfect. The digital waterfall was cascading with inspirational quotes. The Vellum logo, Feed the Future, hung suspended in the air like a benevolent, hollow god. I badged into the elevator. My access was still active. I badged onto the 16th floor, still active. I walked to my gray fabric-lined cubicle, sat in my ergonomic chair, and logged into my terminal. Welcome, M. Quinn. I was still in the system. This was not an oversight. It was Celeste's arrogance. She couldn't just fire me. That would create a messy, documented, retaliatory firing. She needed me to resign. She needed me to sign the gag order. She needed my signature on the NDA before she could push the terminate button. She thought, after a night of terror, that I would be broken, pliable, and desperate. I opened my email. I answered 2 low-priority inquiries about vendor certifications. I sipped the bitter, black coffee from my mug. I acted, in every way, as if this were just another Tuesday. At 8:34 a.m., the email arrived. It was not from Celeste. It was from a Brenda HR, a senior benefits coordinator I'd never spoken to. Subject: friendly follow-up. Hi, Mara. Hope you're having a great morning. Celeste asked me to reach out and see if you had a few minutes for a private, informal chat. Just a friendly check-in. We've booked a small conference room for you. 16 Delta, at 8:45. Just to make sure everything is okay. See you then. Brenda. A friendly check-in, a private, informal chat. In a booked conference room. This was the ambush. This was the execution. HR style. I replied, see you at 8:45. I picked up my laptop. I unplugged the small, encrypted USB drive, the one containing the server logs and the Kratos contract, from my personal device and slipped it into my pocket. I left my coffee on my desk. Conference room 16 Delta was at the end of the hall. It was a huddle room, a glass box with no windows to the outside, designed for quick, uncomfortable meetings. Brenda HR was there, a woman in her 50s with a strained, professional smile and eyes that held a flicker of genuine pity. And Celeste. Celeste was not sitting. She was pacing, a cup of vellum-branded tea in her hand. She looked flawless. Her makeup was perfect. Her silver-gray suit was impeccable. She looked as if she had slept for 8 hours in a climate-controlled vault. There was no sign of last night's feral rage. She was the EVP again, in control. Mara, thank you for coming, Celeste said, her voice a warm, sympathetic murmur. Brenda, could you give us a moment? Mara and I are family. This is a delicate matter. Brenda looked relieved. She scurried out, closing the glass door behind her, encasing us in the soundproofed box. Sit, Mara, please. I sat. The chair was cold. On the table in front of me was a folder, a single, thick, leather-bound folder. I owe you an apology, Celeste began, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. Last night was unacceptable. I was under enormous stress. Your father's financial situation, the pressures of the Kratos launch. It was all too much. I was not myself. She slid the folder across the polished white table. I lost my temper, as your EVP, and as your family. I am deeply, deeply sorry. I didn't say anything. I opened the folder. It was a mutual separation and non-disclosure agreement. My eyes scanned the text. My mind, trained for this exact purpose, began to disassemble it. It was a standard NDA, but on steroids. It wasn't just about vellum. It was a comprehensive personal and professional covenant. It barred me, in perpetuity, from discussing anything. My employment, vellum's business practices, the Kratos contract, and in a beautifully crafted subclause, any and all personal, financial, or familial relationships, interactions, or disputes involving any officer, director, or employee of Vellum Biofoods. It was a gag order on my entire life. And then, I saw the number, the consideration. 6 figures, 3 years' salary, enough to buy a condo, enough to disappear, enough to buy my silence for what she had done, and for what she was about to do with the Kratos contract. I've already spoken to the board's compensation committee, Celeste said, sipping her tea. Given your distress and the clear personality conflict between us, we all agree it's best for your mental health if you take a new path. This is a generous, good faith offer you sign, and this entire unfortunate episode, the argument, the misunderstanding, all of it, it goes away. The family is whole. Your father's position is secure. You get a fresh start. Her smile was kind. It was the kindest, most predatory expression I had ever seen. I read the text again. I let the silence stretch, filling the small, airless room. The hum of the fluorescent light above us was the only sound. I pushed the folder back to her. My finger tapped section 9, subclause B. This, I said, my voice flat, is illegal. Celeste's smile tightened. I'm sorry? This clause, It attempts to waive my right to report a crime or a regulatory violation to a government body. It's a direct violation of the SEC's whistleblower protections under Dodd-Frank. And this part, I tapped another paragraph. The one that gags me from discussing a familial dispute that constitutes a physical assault is unenforceable in this state. It's obstruction. I looked up at her. You're not offering me a severance, Celeste. You're asking me to become your co-conspirator. You're asking me to break the law. For you. The warmth evaporated from her face. The mask fell. The shark was back. You are a mid-level analyst. Mara, you are not a lawyer. You are, as of 9 o'clock an unemployed analyst. This is your only option. Sign the paper. No, I said. I pulled a new sheet of paper from the center of the table. A blank notepad left for meetings. I took the heavy, expensive-looking pen that sat beside it. You're right, I said. This is a legal matter. Celeste smiled, believing she had won, that I was about to sign. I put the pen to the paper, and I began to write. I, Mara Quinn, am in a meeting with EVP Celeste Quinn regarding a threat to my employment. I believe this meeting is retaliatory, following my submission of a formal compliance report, and is related to a physical assault. Celeste's face turned to thunder. What are you doing? I kept writing. I am hereby formally requesting that this meeting stop until my union representative can be present. I signed it. I dated it. I pushed it across the table. As the EVP of HR, there was nothing Celeste loathed more than the OPIU, the union that represented the clerical and analytical staff. It was the one entity in the building she could not bully, and I had just formally, in writing, invoked my right to their protection. You. She was speechless. Her entire plan, a quiet, surgical removal bought with hush money, had just become a documented, official, union-level grievance. You dare! The fluorescent light overhead flickered, once, twice. The large, flat-screen monitor on the wall, used for presentations, snapped on. It glowed blue. Celeste looked at it, confused. Brenda must have... No, I said. I stood up. I walked to the small console at the head of the table. In my hand was the encrypted USB drive from my pocket. The 9 o'clock a.m. emergency board meeting has just been called, I said. Augustus Hale sent the invitation 5 minutes ago, the one you weren't invited to, and he's patched this room into the main presentation feed. You're bluffing, Celeste hissed, grabbing her phone, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She was scrolling, looking for the meeting invite she never received. Last night, I said, my voice calm as I slotted the USB drive into the presentation port. After you hit me, after Augustus and I left, you did something stupid. I clicked a file. The blue screen was replaced by a sterile black-and-white text log. CS log admin access, 234109 PST user ID. C Quinn, action, purge, mailbox M Quinn, sent. Action, purge, mailbox legal counsel, inbox terminal ID, 88.A45.C, EVP-CQ office. You went back to the office, I said, my voice narrating the log. At 11:41 at night, you used your executive admin credentials. You didn't just delete my email. You logged into the general counsel's inbox and deleted the forwarded copy I sent him after the first one bounced. You tried to erase the entire chain. Celeste was white. That's a fabrication. That's Photoshop. Is it? I asked. The door to the conference room opened. 2 men stood there, the general counsel, David Miles, his face grim, and the head of internal audit, Michael Brandt, holding a laptop. They had, as Augustus had promised, been scheduled by him to arrive at this exact moment. Celeste, David, the lawyer, said, his voice heavy. What is this? It's a lie, Celeste shrieked, her composure shattering. She's fabricating evidence. She's retaliating because I was forced to discipline her for poor performance. Photoshop is a good defense, I said. It's hard to disprove. I looked at Michael, the auditor. Michael, you have access to the security archives. Please pull the feed for hallway 19B, outside the executive server closet, last night, around 2340. Michael Brandt, a man who lived for data, didn't look at Celeste. He just typed. His laptop screen mirrored to the monitor. A grainy black and white video feed filled the screen. The timestamp in the corner read 23:40:12. The hallway was empty. 23:40:48. A figure appears, a woman, in a long coat. Her face is turned away, but the silver-gray suit underneath is unmistakable. 23:41:02. The figure stops at the server closet. She swipes a keycard. The light on the reader flashes red. Denied. 23:41:05. She swipes it again, red. 23:41:09. She digs in her purse, pulls out a different card. A red, high-level admin card. She swipes. The light flashes green. The door clicks open. She slips inside, pulling the door shut. 23:41:58. The door opens. She steps out, looks both ways down the empty hall, and walks quickly away. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint whir of the projector fan. David Miles, the lawyer, looked at the log on the screen. He looked at the video. He looked at the formal, handwritten request for union representation I had placed on the table. Celeste didn't speak. She was staring at her own ghost on the screen. A ghost caught committing a federal crime. I pulled my USB drive from the port. The screen went blue. "The trap," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Wasn't the NDA. Celeste, it was you. It was always you." I looked at the two men, who were now, in effect, my witnesses. "Gentlemen," I said, "I believe we have a board meeting to attend." I arrived at 8 o'clock a. The bruise on my cheek was a masterpiece of purple and yellow, a sick, blossoming flower. I had applied concealer, but it was like painting over a crater. It was a statement. I walked through the lobby, my keycard swiped, the green light flashed. I was still an employee. The Ridgemont Tower was quiet, imbued with the sterile, pressurized silence of a morning that hadn't yet been ruined by meetings. The digital waterfall cascaded. The ficus trees stood guard. Feed the future. I took the elevator to the 16th floor, to my cubicle. I sat. I powered on my terminal. I logged in. My access was still active. I had expected to be locked out, but Celeste was arrogant. She believed her 8 o'clock p.m. threat of voluntary resignation was enough. She believed I would be at home, crying, drafting my farewell email. She had underestimated my grandfather, and she had underestimated me. I worked. For 30 minutes. I was Mara Quinn, ethics and compliance analyst. I answered 3 low-priority emails about a new vendor screening protocol. I sipped my coffee. I acted, in every way, as if last night had not happened. I acted as if I hadn't spent the hours from midnight to 4 o'clock a.m. in a suite at the City Club, wargaming every possible scenario with Augustus Hale. At 8:32 a.m., an email popped up. Not a meeting invitation from the board. Not yet. It was from a Brenda HR, a senior benefits coordinator I'd never spoken to. Subject: friendly follow-up. "Hi, Mara. Hope you're having a great morning. Celeste asked me to reach out and see if you had a few minutes for a private, informal chat. Just a friendly check-in. We've booked a small conference room for you. 16 Delta, at 8:45. Just to make sure everything is okay. See you then, Brenda." A friendly check-in, a private, informal chat, in a booked conference room. This was the ambush. This was the execution. HR style. I replied, "See you at 8:45. I picked up my laptop. I unplugged the small, encrypted USB drive, the one containing the server logs and the Kratos contract, from my personal device and slipped it into my pocket. I left my coffee on my desk. Conference room 16 Delta was at the end of the hall. It was a huddle room, a glass box with no windows to the outside, designed for quick, uncomfortable meetings. Brenda HR was there, a woman in her 50s with a strained, professional smile and eyes that held a flicker of genuine pity, and Celeste. Celeste was not sitting, she was pacing, a cup of vellum-branded tea in her hand. She looked flawless. Her makeup was perfect. Her silver-gray suit was impeccable. She looked as if she had slept for 8 hours in a climate-controlled vault. There was no sign of last night's feral rage. She was the EVP again, in control. "Mara, thank you for coming," Celeste said, her voice a warm, sympathetic murmur. "Brenda, could you give us a moment? Mara and I are family. This is a delicate matter." Brenda looked relieved. She scurried out, closing the glass door behind her, encasing us in the soundproofed box. "Sit, Mara, please." I sat. The chair was cold. On the table in front of me was a folder, a single, thick, leather-bound folder. I owe you an apology," Celeste began, her voice dripping with practiced sincerity. "Last night was unacceptable. I was under enormous stress. Your father's financial situation, the pressures of the Kratos launch. It was all too much. I was not myself." She slid the folder across the polished white table. "I lost my temper. As your EVP, and as your family, I am deeply, deeply sorry." I didn't say anything. I opened the folder. It was a mutual separation and non-disclosure agreement. My eyes scanned the text. My mind, trained for this exact purpose, began to disassemble it. It was a standard NDA. But on steroids, it wasn't just about vellum. It was a comprehensive personal and professional covenant. It barred me, in perpetuity, from discussing anything: my employment, Vellum's business practices, the Kratos contract, and in a beautifully crafted subclause, any and all personal, financial, or familial relationships, interactions, or disputes involving any officer, director, or employee of Vellum Biofoods. It was a gag order on my entire life. And then I saw the number, the consideration. 6 figures, 3 years' salary, enough to buy a condo, enough to disappear, enough to buy my silence for what she had done, and for what she was about to do with the Kratos contract. "I've already spoken to the board's compensation committee," Celeste said, sipping her tea. "Given your distress and the clear personality conflict between us, we all agree it's best for your mental health if you take a new path. This is a generous, good-faith offer. You sign, and this entire unfortunate episode, the argument, the misunderstanding, all of it, it goes away. The family is whole. Your father's position is secure. You get a fresh start." Her smile was kind. It was the kindest, most predatory expression I had ever seen. I read the text again. I let the silence stretch, filling the small, airless room. The fluorescent light above us hummed. I pushed the folder back to her. My finger tapped Section 9, Subclause B. "This," I said, my voice flat, "is illegal." Celeste's smile tightened. "I'm sorry?" "This clause, it attempts to waive my right to report a crime or a regulatory violation to a government body. It's a direct violation of the SEC's whistleblower protections under Dodd-Frank. And this part," I tapped another paragraph, "the one that gags me from discussing a familial dispute that constitutes a physical assault, is unenforceable in this state. It's obstruction." I looked up at her. "You're not offering me a severance, Celeste. You're asking me to become your co-conspirator. You're asking me to break the law. For you." The warmth evaporated from her face. The mask fell. The shark was back. "You are a mid-level analyst. Mara, you are not a lawyer. You are, as of 9 o'clock a.m., an unemployed analyst. This is your only option. Sign the paper." "No," I said. I pulled a new sheet of paper from the center of the table, a blank notepad left for meetings. I took the heavy, expensive-looking pen that sat beside it. "You're right," I said. "This is a legal matter." Celeste smiled, believing she had won, that I was about to sign. I put the pen to the paper, and I began to write. I, Mara Quinn, am in a meeting with EVP Celeste Quinn regarding a threat to my employment. I believe this meeting is retaliatory, following my submission of a formal compliance report, and is related to a physical assault. Celeste's face turned to thunder. What are you doing? I kept writing. I am hereby formally requesting that this meeting stop until my legal counsel can be present. I signed it. I dated it. I pushed it across the table. You've been served, Celeste. The tension in the room was no longer a hum. It was a shriek. The air was so tight I could barely breathe. Celeste stared at the note, her hand trembling slightly. She had wanted a quiet surgical removal. I had just created a formal, documented, legal incident. The fluorescent light overhead flickered. Once, twice. The large, flat-screen monitor on the wall, used for presentations, snapped on. It glowed blue. Celeste looked at it, confused. Brenda must have... No, I said. I stood up. I walked to the small console at the head of the table. In my hand was the encrypted USB drive from my pocket. The 9 o'clock emergency board meeting has just been called, I said. Augustus Hale sent the invitation 5 minutes ago, the one you weren't invited to, and he's patched this room into the main presentation feed. You're bluffing, Celeste hissed, grabbing her phone, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She was scrolling, looking for the meeting invite she never received. Last night, I said, my voice calm as I slotted the USB drive into the presentation port. After you hit me, after Augustus and I left, you did something stupid. I clicked a file. The blue screen was replaced by a sterile black and white text log. Syslog admin access, 234109 PST user ID, C Quinn, action, purge, mailbox M Quinn sent, action, purge, mailbox legal counsel inbox terminal ID, 88A45.C, EVP office. You went back to the office, I said, my voice narrating the log. At 11:41 at night, you used your executive admin credentials. You didn't just delete my email. You logged into the general counsel's inbox and deleted the forwarded copy I sent him after the first one bounced. You tried to erase the entire chain. Celeste was white. That's a fabrication. That's Photoshop. Is it? I asked. The door to the conference room opened. 2 men stood there, the general counsel, David Chen, his face grim, and the head of internal audit, Michael Brandt, holding a laptop. They had, as Augustus had promised, been scheduled by him to arrive at this exact moment. Celeste, David, the lawyer, said, his voice heavy, "What is this?" "It's a lie," Celeste shrieked, her composure shattering. "She's fabricating evidence. She's retaliating because I was forced to discipline her for poor performance." Photoshop is a good defense, I said. It's hard to disprove. I looked at Michael, the auditor. Michael, would you be so kind as to pull up security footage? Hallway 19B, outside the executive server closet. Last night, around 2340. Michael Brandt, a man who lived for data, didn't look at Celeste. He just typed. His laptop screen mirrored to the monitor. A grainy black and white video feed filled the screen. The timestamp in the corner read 23:40:12. The hallway was empty. 23:40:48. A figure appears, a woman, in a long coat. Her face is turned away, but the silver-gray suit underneath is unmistakable. 23:41:02. The figure stops at the server closet. She swipes a keycard. The light on the reader flashes red. Denied. 23:41:05. She swipes it again. Red. 23:41:09. She digs in her purse, pulls out a different card, a red high-level admin card. She swipes. The light flashes green. The door clicks open. She slips inside, pulling the door shut. 23:41:58. The door opens. She steps out, looks both ways down the empty hall, and walks quickly away. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the faint whir of the projector fan. David, the lawyer, looked at the log on the screen. He looked at the video. He looked at the formal, handwritten request for legal counsel I had placed on the table. Celeste didn't speak. She was staring at her own ghost on the screen, a ghost caught committing a federal crime. I pulled my USB drive from the port. The screen went blue. "The trap," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Wasn't the contract, Celeste? It was you. It was always you." I looked at the two men, who were now, in effect, my witnesses. "Gentlemen," I said, "I believe we have a board meeting to attend." The boardroom emptied with a pressurized, funereal silence. The vote had been a formality, a clean procedural execution. After I had laid out the Kratos contract's non-compliance, the server logs, and the security footage of Celeste's late-night visit, there was no debate. It was no longer a question of if, but how fast. Augustus's allies, Wembley and Dr. Vance, had made the motion. The general counsel, his face as pale as the marble table, had recommended immediate suspension, citing the Sarbanes-Oxley violation as an existential threat to the company. The CEO, Thompson, who saw his own stock price flashing before his eyes, had seconded it. Celeste was suspended. Her access was revoked. An independent forensic audit was commissioned. It was all over in 20 minutes. I gathered my files. The other directors, the ones who had been Celeste's sycophants, filed out quickly, their eyes fixed on the carpet, refusing to meet mine. They were calculating their own new allegiances. Dr. Vance gave me a curt, sharp nod of respect. Augustus was already gone. Having left the moment the vote was unanimous, he didn't celebrate. For him, this was just step one, sanitation. I stepped out of the cold, the quiet room into the 19th floor hallway. The thick carpet absorbed my footsteps. I was heading for the elevator, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. "Mara." His voice was a strained whisper. My father, Daniel, was waiting for me in an alcove by the fire exit. He hadn't been in the meeting. He wasn't board level. He was just a high-paid consultant, and he looked like he had been told of a death. His face was a grayish-white, his eyes wide and panicked. He grabbed my arm, not violently, but with a desperate, trembling grip. "What did you do?" he hissed, pulling me further into the alcove, out of sight. "I did my job, Dad." I pulled my arm free. "Your job? You ruined me. You're killing my career. You're killing me." His voice cracked, the panic rising. "Celeste, they just shut off her phone, her corporate cards. They're suspended, indefinitely." "Yes, that's what happens when you commit a federal crime." "You don't understand," he said, his hands fluttering, a man trying to plug a dozen holes in a sinking dam. "The banks, the loans, everything is tied to her status as an active EVP. The mortgage on the apartment, the loan on the boat, the margin calls, they'll all be called. They're all cross-collateralized. We're insolvent. You just wiped us out. Mara, you wiped me out. For what? Revenge?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The expensive, hand-stitched suit, the silk tie, the panic of a man who had built his entire worth on the assets of another, and had just discovered those assets were fraudulent. He was a house of cards in a wind tunnel. "You're worried about the wrong debts, Dad?" I reached into my briefcase. I had come prepared. Augustus's legal team hadn't just audited Vellum, they had audited him. I pulled out a thin, folded document. It was a copy. "I didn't know how far it went," I said, my voice as cold and flat as the marble floor. "I had Augustus's team look into your special projects position. They looked into the assets you and Celeste filed on your joint financial disclosures." I handed him the paper. "What is this?" he asked, his hands shaking so much he could barely hold it. "It's a personal loan agreement for $750,000 from a private lender called Ridgemont Holdings Group, LLC. His eyes scanned it, uncomprehending. Yes, yes. This was for the properties, to cover the margin calls. Celeste handled the paperwork. She said it was just a standard bridge loan, to tide us over. She said it was from a bank, I stated. Yes, a private wealth bank, Ridgemont Holdings. That's the bank, isn't it? No, Dad, I said. Ridgemont Holdings Group is a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Does the name mean anything to you? It's the same shell company that Kratos Logistics uses to hide its non-compliant subcontractors, the one that's managed by Celeste's cousin. He stared at me, the blood draining completely from his face. What? What are you saying? I'm saying Celeste didn't get you a loan from a bank. She forged your signature, I said, my voice dropping. To borrow $750,000 from her own kickback scheme, using your stock and your position as the collateral, she wasn't helping you. Dad, she was laundering her dirty money through you. You weren't her husband. You were her alibi. No, he whispered. He fumbled for his reading glasses, his hands clumsy. He put them on. Look at page 4, I said, the borrower's attestation, and look at page 7, the personal guarantee. He looked, his finger, trembling, traced the signature line. It was his name, Daniel T. Quinn, but it was wrong. His confident, practiced signature was off. The T was too looped. The connection between the Q and the U was too sharp. It was a good forgery, a very good one, but it wasn't his. I didn't, he stammered, looking from one signature to the other. This one on page 7. I never signed this. I know. He looked up, his eyes hollow, the full weight of his own destruction settling on him. He wasn't just compromised. He wasn't just a fool. He was a tool, a pawn in a felony. Who, I asked, my voice quiet, is saving whom here, Dad? He slumped back against the brushed steel wall, the document crinkling in his fist. He made a small, choking sound. He was a man who had just seen his own ghost. The quiet, solid sound of expensive leather shoes on marble echoed in the alcove. Augustus Hale appeared. He didn't look at me. He looked at my father. His face not angry, not disappointed, just assessing, like a man reviewing a line item on a ledger that had been disastrously miscategorized. Augustus put one hand on my father's shoulder. It was not a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of taking account. Daniel, Augustus said, his voice soft but carrying an immense weight. You allowed your life to become collateral. You chose debt over truth. You let another person sign your name, literally and figuratively, until you yourself were insolvent. My father didn't, or couldn't, respond. He just stared, broken. Augustus reached into his breast pocket. He didn't pull out a checkbook. He pulled out a single, heavy, cream-colored business card. This man, he said, holding it out, is Arthur Pike. He is a civil litigator. He is the best financial fraud and divorce attorney in this city. My father stared at the card as if it were a snake. He is already retained, Augustus continued. His initial fee has been paid. He is waiting for your call. He will advise you on how to file for fraud, how to separate your assets, what little is left, and how to ensure that when your wife's criminal trial begins, you are sitting in the witness box and not at the defendant's table beside her. Augustus pressed the card into my father's limp hand, closing his fingers around it. He will save your house, Daniel, if you let him. My father looked at the card. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Pleading for what? Forgiveness? For me to fix this? For me to tell him it was all a nightmare? I didn't. I turned away, looking through the massive plate glass window, down at the lobby, at the Feed the Future sign hanging in the atrium. I heard my grandmother's voice, clear as a bell. I was 14, in her garden. I had lied about breaking a terracotta pot, blaming it on a neighbor's dog. She had known instantly, She didn't yell. She just handed me a broom. "Choose the truth, Mara," she had said, her hands covered in soil. "It's the only thing that's really yours. Choose the truth first. Then, you choose the people who choose it with you. Anyone else. They are a bad debt. You must never let a bad debt ruin your books." I looked back at my father. He was clutching the lawyer's card. He was staring at the floor. The full, crushing reality of his life, his choices, his weakness, all bearing down on him. I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were dry, cracked, and small. They were not an absolution. They were not an excuse. They were a bankruptcy declaration, an admission that he was morally, financially, and spiritually empty. It was slow, it was heavy, but it was enough. In that moment, the cold, hard fury I had held for him, for his weakness, for his complicity, for his silence in the kitchen, it didn't vanish, but it shifted, it recategorized. My revenge was never aimed at him. He was just a liability she had used to shield herself, a human-shaped asset she had stripped, leveraged, and was prepared to liquidate. The family ledger was open. The pages were a mess of red ink, fraudulent entries, and toxic debts. But for the first time, I was the one holding the pen, and I was about to start balancing the books. The suspension was not an ending. It was a starting pistol. Celeste was gone, escorted from the building by security, but her infrastructure remained. Her network of complicit managers, her toxic policies, and the landmine of the Kratos contract were all still ticking. The board had put me on special assignment, reporting directly to the general counsel, David, and the head of audit, Michael Brandt. It was a temporary, undefined role, a holding pattern. They had given me a new, sterile office on the 17th floor, a glass box with a clean desk, a new terminal, and a direct line to IT. They thought they were isolating me. They were, in fact, giving me a command center. My first act was not to celebrate. It was to build a fortress. I spent 4 hours drafting the official formal whistleblower report. This was not an email. This was not a memo. It was a 30-page legal declaration, a document I was simultaneously lodging with the General Counsel's office, the Audit Committee, and via a secure portal managed by Augustus's legal team, the Securities and Exchange Commission. I didn't just attach the server logs and the video file. I ran every single piece of digital evidence, the Kratos contract PDF, the server metadata, the MP4 of Celeste in the hallway, through a cryptographic hash function. Each file was assigned a unique 256-bit digital fingerprint, an SHA-256 hash. I embedded these hashes, along with their precise, immutable timestamps, directly into the report. My evidence was no longer just a collection of files. It was a cryptographically sealed, legally unbreakable chain of proof. If anyone, anywhere, tried to alter so much as a comma in those original files, the hash would change. The tampering would be instantly visible. My second act was to defuse the bombs Celeste had left behind. "David," I said, standing in the General Counsel's doorway. He looked up, his eyes weary. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, and who didn't expect to sleep for another month. "Michael, I need to activate a legal hold, effective immediately." David sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Mara, the board suspended Celeste. The independent audit is coming. Isn't that enough?" "No," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "You suspended her. You didn't suspend her network. I need a full, system-wide litigation hold on all email accounts, hard drives, and mobile devices for her entire executive team, her 4 direct reports in HR, and the 2 EVPs in external affairs, the ones who co-signed her cost-saving initiatives." Michael Brandt, the auditor, nodded slowly, understanding the logic. A legal hold would prevent anyone from deleting anything. It was the corporate equivalent of roping off a crime scene. "They'll call it a witch hunt," David warned. "Let them," I said. "We're just preserving the records. Unless they have something to hide, they shouldn't have a problem with it." He signed the order, The IT department, now fully aware of who was giving the commands, executed it in under an hour. The digital traps were set. My third act was the one that truly mattered. "Michael," I said, turning to the auditor, "the independent team will focus on the digital trail, the money, the Kratos contract. I need to look at the physical trail." "What physical trail?" "Celeste's PR. For the last 6 months, she's been running a huge Vellum Cares campaign. Part of it involved glowing press releases about our state-of-the-art supply chain partners. Specifically, she spotlighted 3 clean warehouses, Kratos facilities. She even took reporters on a tour of the one in North Ridgemont." "I remember," Michael said. "Pristine floors, solar panels, happy workers in new uniforms. It was great PR." "It was a lie," I said. "It was a stage. It's what she wanted us to see. What about the facilities she didn't show us? The contract I flagged. It wasn't just about insurance. It was designed to create a black box, to hide the parts of the supply chain that weren't ready for a photo op." "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to authorize an immediate, unannounced, third-party physical inspection, not of the clean warehouse. I want an inspection of the other nodes, the ones the Kratos contract really relies on, the ones in South Bend, Gary, and the Detroit crossdock." Michael was a numbers man, but he understood physical risk. He made the call. He hired a nationally recognized supply chain safety auditor, a neutral third party with a reputation for brutal, uncompromising reports. They were dispatched that afternoon. The results came back in less than 48 hours. It wasn't a long, detailed report. It was an emergency red flag email, a single PDF attachment, and a frantic voicemail from the lead auditor. I opened the PDF. Michael and David read it over my shoulder. The clean warehouses were fine, but the auditors had followed the truck routes, and they had found it. Tucked away in an industrial park in Gary, Indiana, was a facility that wasn't on any Vellum manifest. It wasn't in the Kratos portfolio. It was an undeclared, non-certified, third-party subcontracted cold storage node. The auditor's report was not technical, it was visceral. The facility was a disaster. The temperature logs for the freezers were being faked. The loading dock lifts were non-compliant with OSHA safety standards. Worse, the independent gig operators, the drivers I had been worried about, were being forced to load their own trucks without safety equipment. The report included a photograph of a handwritten sign taped to a broken forklift. "Out of service, use handjacks, MJMT." This wasn't just a financial liability. This was a human rights disaster waiting to happen. This was a public health time bomb, filled with our perishable, plant-based products. This was the real cost of Celeste's 40% cost reduction. "My God," David whispered, his hand going to his mouth. "If the Times gets this, if a driver gets killed, we're not just liable, we're finished." The CEO, Thompson, called an emergency executive meeting. The room was no longer the formal boardroom. It was a smaller interior war room. The mood was pure, unadulterated panic. "Contain it," Thompson yelled, his face red. "Shut it down. Pay them off. I want a legal firewall around this. David, now." "You can't," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. All eyes turned to me, the analyst, the girl who had started all this. "You can't contain a physical warehouse," I said, standing at the head of the table. "You can't contain a broken forklift. You can't contain a dozen drivers who already know we're non-compliant. The moment we try to bury this, one of them will call a reporter, and they will be right to do so. Our only move is not containment, it's transparency." "Transparency," the CFO scoffed. "Do you want our stock to hit 0 by noon?" "I want us to survive the week," I countered. "I've drafted a plan." I slid a thin file to each executive. It's a 14-day remediation and transparency plan. Step 1. We immediately sever the Kratos contract, citing gross negligence and breach of contract. Step 2. We engage a top-tier, certified logistics firm to take over the supply chain, effective immediately. Step 3. We voluntarily report the findings of the third-party audit to OSHA and the FDA. Before they hear it from someone else, we control the narrative by being the narrative. I paused, letting that sink in. And step 4, I said. We issue a public press release. Today, in it, we state that a routine internal compliance audit, which is what this is, uncovered significant safety and labor violations with a third-party vendor. We announce we have terminated that vendor, that we have reported the violations ourselves, and that we are establishing a new $5 million fund to compensate any workers impacted by these practices. The room was silent. They were staring at me as if I had just suggested setting the building on fire. A media storm, the COO whispered. They will crucify us. The door to the war room opened, and Augustus Hale walked in. He had not been invited. He simply arrived. He carried his leather briefcase. A storm is coming, gentlemen, he said, his voice calm, as he took a seat at the end of the table. You are quite correct. He looked at the panicked faces. Then he looked at me. But storms always pass. They only destroy what isn't built on concrete. Your facts. He nodded at me. Our concrete, this plan, he tapped the file, is concrete, hiding in a house of straw, which is what your containment strategy is, will ensure you are destroyed. Build on the concrete. The executives, who knew exactly who he was now, were silent. They were trapped between their fear of the press and their fear of their largest, quietest shareholder. I took the opening. I've already prepared the Q&A, I said, my voice gaining strength. I've workshopped the 50 most difficult questions a reporter could ask. I've drafted the script for a temporary worker hotline to field complaints and process claims from the Kratos drivers. The plan is ready. It just needs your approval. Later that afternoon, Arthur Wembley and Dr. Lila Vance, my grandfather's allies, requested a private meeting with the CEO. I wasn't there, but the outcome was immediate. Thompson called me to his office. The panic was gone. He looked resigned, defeated. Wembley and Vance are insistent, he said, avoiding my eyes. They've made their support for this very aggressive plan, conditional. Conditional on what? Celeste Quinn's immediate termination, not suspension, termination, for cause, and a full, top-to-bottom restructuring of the entire HR and External Affairs division. They want it dissolved and rebuilt, under new leadership. He finally looked at me, his gaze heavy. The board is in agreement. The liability is too great. We have to clean house. We have to build on the concrete. He paused, straightening a stack of papers on his desk. This is an unprecedented crisis. It requires a leader who understands the details. Someone who already has a plan. The board and Mr. Hale have asked me to make a formal request. He looked at me, the CEO, the man who, 48 hours ago, barely knew my name. Who, he asked, his voice formal, will lead this restructuring process? Who will manage this transition and take on the role of interim chief of ethics and risk? He didn't need to say my name. Every executive in the war room was staring at me. The girl who had dropped the bomb was now the only person who knew how to defuse it. I did not smile. This was not a victory. It was a battlefield promotion. I just nodded. Once. I'll need to see the new organizational chart by morning, I said. The promotion was not a coronation. It was a cleanup operation. As interim chief of ethics and risk, I was no longer an analyst finding problems. I was an executive expected to solve them. My first 72 hours were a blur of crisis meetings, public statements, and frantic calls with the new, high-end logistics firm we'd hired to replace Kratos. We were, as my grandfather had commanded, building on concrete, and it was hard, dusty, exhausting work. Celeste, in theory, was gone, suspended, terminated for cause, erased from the corporate directory, but her ghost lingered. Her empire, as she'd seen it, was still woven into the company's financial DNA. On the fourth day, I received a visit, not from Augustus, but from a thin, older man in a perfectly cut, funereal black suit. He was the senior partner from the Zurich law firm that managed the Hale Rivers Fund. He didn't introduce himself by name. He simply placed a single, wafer-thin file on my new, massive desk. Mr. Hale asked us to conduct a deep archive review of the original Vellum corporate charter, the lawyer said. His voice was Swiss-accented, precise as a watch movement. Not the modern bylaws, the 1998 foundational articles of incorporation. We found something archaic, and for you, extremely useful. He tapped the file. Appendix G, Section 4, the Fiduciary and Moral Turpitude Clause. It was a relic, a piece of corporate boilerplate from an era before relentless velocity and conscious capitalism. It was written by old money lawyers who believed in sin. The clause was simple. If any officer of the company, at the rank of executive vice president or higher, was terminated for cause involving financial malfeasance, criminal fraud, or actions constituting gross moral turpitude, then all standing contracts, vendor agreements, and financial covenants negotiated solely by that officer in the 36 months prior to their termination were subject to immediate, automatic, good faith review and potential nullification by the board, without penalty to the company. I read it twice. Nullification without penalty. The lawyer permitted himself a thin, wintry smile. Your grandmother had that clause inserted. She distrusted, as she put it, charming people with easy access to other people's money. He stood up. We have already cross-referenced this clause with a list of all active contracts signed by Celeste Quinn. The list is on page 2. Good day, Ms. Quinn. He left. I opened the file. Page 2 was 5 pages long. It was her entire kingdom. The $10 million a year contract with the crisis PR firm she'd hired, run by her former college roommate, the sustainability consulting agreement with the think tank in Dietrich, which had paid her 6-figure speaking fees, the bloated, multi-year media buying contracts that locked Vellum into ad spends at twice the market rate, the external affairs budgets, the lobbying firms, all of it. Her entire web of influence, her external microphone, her network of friends who owed her favors. It was all built on contracts that I could now, with a single vote from the board, turn into smoke. I called an emergency session of the Finance Committee. I didn't present it as revenge. I presented it as what it was, a sudden and unexpected cost-saving opportunity. I laid out the contracts. I laid out the clause. By exercising our rights under Appendix G, I said, my voice clinical, we can reclaim approximately $48 million in non-essential, high-risk operational spending before the end of the fiscal year. The vote was unanimous. Celeste's PR empire evaporated in less than 15 minutes. The second consequence happened without my intervention. The bank that held the primary mortgage on my father and Celeste's shared apartment, the loan that was guaranteed by her status and her Vellum stock, saw the press release. They saw the words, terminated for cause, forensic audit, and financial malfeasance. The bank's risk department acted instantly. They froze all her credit lines. They froze the joint accounts. They flagged the mortgage as being in high-risk default, pending a full review of the guarantors. Simultaneously, the bank handling my father's fraudulent bridge loan from the Kratos Shell Company, Ridgemont Holdings Group, saw that its primary asset was now the subject of a federal investigation. They didn't just freeze the account. They put a lien on it and turned the files over to the district attorney's office. Celeste was cut off. No corporate card, no personal credit, no access to the joint accounts, no network of powerful PR friends to leak her side of the story. She had lost her shield, her access, and her microphone, all in one afternoon. She became, for the first time in her life, a person with no leverage. And that, of course, was when she became truly dangerous. She couldn't call my office. I had blocked her number. She couldn't email me. Her accounts were locked. So at 3:00 p.m., she simply appeared. She had bypassed the new security protocol by calling the CEO's assistant directly. claiming it was a family medical emergency. She was waiting for me in the 19th floor glass conference room, the main boardroom where she had been executed. When I walked in, she wasn't alone. The CEO, Thompson, was there, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. David, the general counsel, was there, his arms crossed, his face a mask of legal neutrality. Celeste was standing by the window. She was not in her usual immaculate cashmere. She was in jeans and a simple, wrinkled blouse. Her hair was pulled back. She looked diminished, but her eyes were burning. "This," she said, her voice shaking with a cold, controlled rage as I entered, "is a farce." I stopped. I didn't sit. I placed my laptop on the far end of the table. "This is not a meeting. Celeste, you are not an employee. You are trespassing." "I am clearing my name," she spat. "I have demanded this meeting. You, Thompson, David, you are going to listen." She turned to the CEO. "You have allowed this child, to orchestrate a personal, familial vendetta. This entire audit is a sham. It's a conspiracy. It's a hostile takeover engineered by my bitter, delusional stepdaughter and her senile grandfather. It's built on fabricated evidence and lies." Thompson looked at David, helpless. David, the lawyer, just sighed. Celeste pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this. You poisoned them against me. You took a simple family dispute and twisted it into this. You destroyed my life. All because you were jealous. All because you couldn't stand to see your father happy." Her voice was rising, becoming the shrill, desperate sound from the kitchen. This was her last play, to frame me as the hysterical, vengeful daughter, to discredit the entire investigation as a family matter. I let her finish. The air in the room was thick and toxic. I unzipped my laptop bag. I set my company phone on the table. "Celeste," I said, my voice perfectly, terrifyingly calm. "These are incredibly serious, slanderous allegations. You are accusing me, an executive of this company, of conspiracy. You are accusing a primary shareholder, Mr. Hale, of the same. You are accusing the general counsel and the CEO of complicity." I tapped the record icon on my phone's voice memo app. A small red light glowed. "If we are to continue this discussion," I said, "I must insist that we record it for legal accuracy. I'm sure you understand." Celeste froze. Her mouth, which had been opened to deliver another volley, snapped shut. "Furthermore," I continued, "since you are alleging a conspiracy against you and claiming this is a personal dispute that has created a hostile work environment, I think it's only fair that we have a neutral and third-party observer present to ensure proper procedure is followed." What procedure?" Thompson stammered. "Her procedure," I said. I looked at the conference room door. "You can come in. Mr. Riley?" The door opened. A man in a rumpled suit, with a tired face and a thick binder under his arm, walked in. It was Ken Riley, the lead shop steward and corporate representative for the Office and Professional Employees International Union. Celeste's face, which had been red with rage, went the color of ash. As EVP of HR, Celeste's primary internal project for 5 years had been a brutal, union-busting campaign. She despised Ken Riley. She'd called him a parasite in executive meetings. He was, to her, the living embodiment of everything that slowed down relentless velocity. And I had just invited him to her termination hearing. "Mr. Riley," I said politely, "Ms. Quinn has requested this meeting to allege a multi-pronged conspiracy against her, which she claims is personal and familial in nature. I wanted you to be here to represent her interests and to ensure HR policy is followed to the letter." Riley just nodded, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, taking in the entire scene. He sat down. He opened his binder. He clicked his pen. "Please proceed, Ms. Quinn," he said, his voice flat. Celeste was trapped. She couldn't speak. She couldn't possibly level her wild, slanderous accusations in front of him. He would take notes. He would have a field day. Her entire family conspiracy defense was neutralized. I, she stammered. This is irregular. He has no standing here. Oh, I think he does, I said. This is a workplace dispute, is it not? You were just claiming, forcefully, that you were railroaded. Mr. Riley is here to make sure you aren't. She stared at me, her eyes filled with pure, unadulterated hatred. You claim this is about family, Celeste, I said, my voice soft. You claim I'm the one who improperly mixed our personal lives with our work. You claim I fabricated this entire scenario out of spite. I picked up my phone. The red light was still glowing. It's funny you should mention that, I said. You seem to have it backwards. I have a recording of my own. One from before all of this. One from when you were trying to leverage our family connection to force me to bury a compliance report. I didn't look at the recording. I knew it by heart. I pressed play. The speakers on the phone were loud in the silent, glass-walled room. Her voice, her calm, smooth, corporate venom voice, filled the air. Your father loves his work here. He feels productive, valued. It's given him a new lease on life. It would be a tragedy if the company's health forced us to reconsider non-essential roles in a downturn. Consultants are always the first to go. Family first, work second. We take care of our own. Mara, don't we? I pressed stop. No one spoke. Ken Riley, the union rep, slowly underlined something on his notepad. David, the lawyer, closed his eyes, his case now complete. Thompson just stared at the white, polished surface of the table. Celeste. She just deflated. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a puncture, the rage, the fire, the arrogance. It all hissed out of her, leaving an empty, papery shell. She understood. She had lost. She had lost the job, the money, the power, and now she had lost the argument. She had lost the narrative. I slid a single piece of paper across the table. It wasn't a complex NDA. It was a one-sentence, general resignation, effective immediately, waiving all further claims against the company. I slid a pen next to it, a heavy, expensive, vellum-branded pen, the same model that had been in the small conference room where she'd tried to buy my silence. She stared at the paper, then at the pen. She looked up at me, her eyes empty, all the fight gone, replaced by a deep, cold void. You can't do this to me, she whispered. It wasn't a protest. It was a statement of disbelief. I'm not, I said, my voice just as quiet, leaning in so only she could hear. This is just the bylaw you didn't read, Appendix G. It's already done. Your PR contracts are void. Your network is gone. The bank accounts are frozen. There is nothing left to fight for. This is just the paperwork. I pushed the pen closer. She looked at the CEO. He wouldn't meet her gaze. She looked at the lawyer. He was studying the ceiling. She looked at the union rep. He was waiting, pen poised. She was utterly, completely, and procedurally alone. Her hand, shaking, reached out. It picked up the pen. The only sound in the room was the scratch of the nib on the heavy paper as she signed her name. She dropped the pen, it rolled, hit a notepad, and stopped. The entire room, as one, let out a breath it had been holding for 3 years. The auditorium lights were hotter than I had ever imagined, and brighter. They were not the soft, flattering lights of a TED Talk. They were the harsh, white, surgical lights of an interrogation. The room was packed. Vellum had its own press theater on the 3rd floor, a room designed for product launches and glossy announcements about our conscious capitalism. Today, it was a feeding frenzy. Every major financial news outlet was there, alongside local television crews and tech bloggers. They smelled blood in the water. I sat in the front row, not on the stage, not yet. On the stage, under the glare, sat our CEO, Thompson, and our general counsel, David. Thompson was visibly sweating, his face pale. He leaned into the microphone, his hands, holding a prepared statement, trembling slightly. "Good morning," he began, his voice artificially amplified. "We have called this press conference to announce a period of significant and necessary transition for Vellum Biofoods." He proceeded to read, in a strained monotone, the statement that David and I had spent the last 8 hours drafting. He announced that a routine internal compliance review had uncovered significant systemic failures within our supply chain. He announced the immediate termination, for cause, of the Kratos Logistics contract. He announced the suspension, the termination, for cause, of an executive-level employee whose actions had, he said, violated the trust of this company, our shareholders, and our customers. He did not use Celeste's name. He didn't have to. The press had already, gleefully, connected the dots. In response, Thompson continued, gaining a small, false confidence as he neared the end of his script, "We have launched a full, independent forensic audit of the divisions in question. We have established a new 24-hour whistleblower hotline, managed by an external third party, and we have begun the implementation of a comprehensive remediation plan." He took a sip of water, his hand shaking, "To lead this transition, and to present the details of this new path forward, I am appointing a new interim chief of ethics and risk. This individual is the person who first, identified the procedural anomalies." He looked at me. It was my cue. "Please welcome Ms. Mara Quinn." I stood. I walked from the dimness of the front row, up the small stairs, and into the white-hot glare. The sound of 100 camera shutters firing at once was not a click. It was a rattle, a dry, mechanical, insectile sound. I felt, rather than saw, every single journalist in the room zoom in on the mottled purple and yellow bruise that still stained my left cheek. I had, of course, worn no makeup to cover it. It was part of the uniform. I walked past Thompson and David to the central podium. I placed my single sheet of notes on it. I looked out into the sea of bright, hungry faces. I did not blink. "Good morning," I said. My voice was clear. It was cold, and it was, through the microphone, amplified to fill every corner of the room. What Mr. Thompson has called procedural anomalies were, in fact, critical failures in our duty of care, not just to our shareholders, but to our workers and our customers. I did not read from a script. I looked directly at the central camera, the one with the glowing red light. As of this morning, my office has taken 3 primary steps. 1. We have secured the integrity of our supply chain by engaging a new, best-in-class logistics partner, effective immediately. 2. We have activated a full, system-wide legal hold to ensure all internal records are preserved for the independent auditors. And 3. We are implementing a new, zero-tolerance compliance charter that will be tied directly to executive compensation. I paused. The room was silent. This was not the evasive, jargon-filled PR spin they were used to. "I will now take your questions," I said. A dozen hands shot up. I pointed to a woman in the front from the Wall Street Journal. "Ms. Quinn?" she said, her voice sharp. "This is an unprecedented shakeup, but the analyst reports this morning are skeptical. They call this a scapegoat firing. How can you assure the market that this failure doesn't go all the way to the top?" "Because I am at the top," I said, without missing a beat. "My new office is responsible for oversight, and it now has the full authority of the board and our primary shareholders to enforce it. We are not scapegoating an individual. We are excising a culture. We found that Vellum prioritized velocity over safety. That culture, and the people who enabled it, stops today." I pointed to another reporter, a young, aggressive man from a tech blog. "Ms. Quinn, you're the one who blew the whistle, right? This investigation centered on Celeste Quinn, the EVP of HR, who is also your stepmother. Aren't you afraid? Aren't you afraid of retaliation from the very executives you've just exposed?" This was the first mine. I had prepared for it. I did not look at Thompson or David. I looked straight at the reporter. "I am not afraid of the truth," I said, my voice cutting through the room. We found a system that was failing. I do not believe in a system that punishes people for pointing that out. In fact, I leaned in, just slightly. I trust the system, when we force it to look straight at the facts. The words hung in the air. The man, satisfied, sat down. I pointed to a third reporter, an older woman from the Ridgemont Post. Her eyes were sharp. She had seen it all. "Ms. Quinn, a follow-up, if I may," she said, her voice polite but surgically precise. "You're speaking about facts. The fact is, you have a very significant, very fresh bruise on your face. This investigation, as my colleague noted, centered on your stepmother. Are these two facts related?" The room went dead. It was not a silence. It was a vacuum. Every camera, every microphone, every eye in that room was fixed on my face, on the evidence. Thompson stopped breathing. David looked down at his legal pad as if he could will himself to dissolve through it. This was the moment, the one where they expected me to falter, to cry, to become the hysterical, vengeful daughter Celeste had tried to paint. I held the reporter's gaze. I did not flinch. "Thank you for your concern," I said, my voice perfectly level, almost gentle. "My family and I have addressed that situation internally, and we are handling it according to the law." It was a non-answer that was a perfect, complete, and devastating yes. It confirmed everything, and it gave them nothing. It drew a line of steel between the personal crime and the corporate one. It said, "That part is being handled, criminally, now, back to business." Before the woman could ask a follow-up, I seized the podium. "But that," I said, my voice rising, becoming a command, "is not why we are here. We are not here to discuss my family. We are here to discuss the workers, the drivers, the warehouse staff, the men and women who were put at risk by these policies." I owned the room again. The internal audit has confirmed that the Kratos contract created an unsafe, uninsured, and exploitative environment for dozens of drivers. Vellum Biofoods has a moral and financial obligation to correct this. I took a breath. This was the real announcement. This was the kill shot. To that end, Vellum is announcing the immediate establishment of a new $5 million worker compensation and safety fund. This fund will be managed by an independent third party, and it will be used to pay all outstanding insurance claims, lost wages, and damages for any worker impacted by these practices. The room was buzzing. $5 million. This was not a token gesture. "Furthermore," I said, cutting through the noise, "to ensure this fund is managed with the highest possible integrity and to signal our new, permanent commitment to ethical practice, Vellum has secured a foundational, matching grant." I looked, once more, at the central camera. This fund is being co-sponsored by the Hale Rivers Fund. Absolute, stunned silence. The local reporters looked confused, but the Wall Street Journal reporter, her eyes went wide. The Bloomberg reporter was already typing furiously on his laptop. They knew that name. They knew the ghost, the invisible, 8% shareholder. The ghost had just stepped into the light. My grandfather had just, publicly, signed his name to my work. It was a declaration of support. It was a signal to the market. It was the final, definitive checkmate. And then, something happened I did not expect. A single person in the back of the room began to clap. Then another. It wasn't the press. It was, I squinted, it was Ken Riley, the union rep. He was standing. Then the older Post reporter began to clap. And then, the entire room. It was not a polite, golf course applause. It was a real, bursting, cathartic sound. They were not clapping for me. They were not clapping for Vellum. They were clapping because, for one brief, shining moment, someone had been held accountable. And the people who had been hurt were actually being helped. They were clapping because the system, for once, had actually worked. I stepped back from the podium, letting Thompson and David take over, to field the technical, financial questions. I walked to the side of the stage, my part done. As I did, my gaze scanned the back of the auditorium. In the last row, sitting in the shadows near the exit, were two figures, my father, Daniel, in an ill-fitting suit, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, and beside him, Augustus Hale, his hands resting on his briefcase, his posture immaculate. They were just watching, observers. As I stepped off the stage, my father's eyes met mine. He did not smile. He just looked at me. He looked at the woman on the stage. He looked at the bruise, and he looked at what I had built on top of it. He nodded. Once, a slow, pained, respectful acknowledgement. Augustus, beside him, also nodded. Once, his was not pained. It was a nod of completion. Task complete. The ledger was balanced. I walked out of the auditorium as the Q&A continued behind me. The adrenaline was fading fast, leaving a deep, vibrating exhaustion in its place. I took the elevator, alone, back to the 19th floor, to Celeste's old office, my new office. I walked in. The room was massive. The glass wall overlooking the city. My phone, which had been on silent, vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from the head of building security. It contained only one line. Ms. Quinn. See, Quinn has vacated the premises. She is off property. It was over. I walked to the massive wall of glass. I stood where she had stood, where she had threatened my father's job, where she had built her paper kingdom. I looked down at Ridgemont. The cars were still moving. The people, tiny as ants, were still rushing to their meetings. The entire complex machine of the city was running exactly as it had 24 hours ago. But from up here, from this new altitude, the noise was different. The chaos seemed distant. The city was still running, but for the first time in my life, it felt quiet. It was late afternoon. The elevator to the 19th floor was silent, the polished steel doors sliding open with a soft, expensive sigh. I stepped out. The office was a tomb. It was Celeste's office, the one she had furnished as a throne room, but the company's sanitation crew had already been through. Her personal photos, her awards, her orchids, all gone. All that remained was the enormous, sterile white desk, too heavy to move, and the floor-to-ceiling wall of glass that overlooked the city. The room was undecorated. It was empty. It was just light and glass and a clean, wiped-down surface. I walked to the desk, the plush carpet absorbing the sound of my heels. I sat in the high-backed leather chair. It felt cold. On the terminal, the screensaver was a generic vellum logo. I touched the mouse. The login prompt for M. Quinn, analyst, appeared. Asking for my old password, my account, my access, my entire former life, still waiting for me. The elevator chimed. I didn't turn around. I heard the soft, deliberate footsteps. Augustus Hale stopped on the other side of the desk. He looked at the empty room, then at me. He reached into his cashmere coat, the one that smelled of cedar. He pulled out the heavy brass keyring. He placed it on the marble desk. The clang of the metal on the stone was the same sound I had heard in the kitchen. It was the sound of a gavel, a declaration, a beginning. This time, he placed something else beside it, a small, simple, silver-framed photograph. I picked it up. It was my grandmother, Eleanor. She was young, perhaps my age, standing in a garden, her hands covered in soil, laughing, her face turned toward the sun. "You opened the door yourself, Mara," Augustus said. His voice was quiet in the cavernous room. "I just stood to block the wind." The elevator chimed again. My father, Daniel, stood in the doorway. He looked lost. He was wearing an off-the-rack suit that I knew his lawyer, Mr. Pike, had probably told him to buy. He looked at Augustus. He looked at the photograph of his first wife. He walked to the desk, his steps hesitant. He held a small piece of plastic in his hand. He looked at me, his eyes full of a complex, silent apology. He placed the object on the desk, next to the keys. It was Celeste's corporate ID card, the one security had taken from her. Her smiling, professional. Brunette face stared up at the ceiling. A ghost. My father had placed it there like a final, folded flag. He had closed the chapter. No one spoke. There were no speeches. There were no goodbyes. There were no what nows. The work was done. The ledger, both corporate and familial, was balanced. Augustus turned and walked out. My father lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on his first wife's smiling face. Then he turned and followed my grandfather. The elevator doors slid shut, leaving me in the profound, echoing silence. I turned back to the computer terminal. M.A. Quinn, analyst. I moved the mouse to the corner of the screen. I clicked Switch User. The old account vanished. A new login prompt appeared. Administrator. I typed in the new credentials. M. Quinn, Interim Chief, Ethics and Risk. I logged in. I was logging into the reality I had chosen. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip below the skyline, the lights of Ridgemont flickering on one by one, a sea of data points below me. Finally, I stood. I didn't turn on the lamps. I walked to the door, the city light strong enough to cast my shadow. I paused at the door and looked back at the wall of glass, which was no longer a window, but a mirror. My reflection stared back at me, a woman in a dark suit, standing in a dark, empty office. I leaned closer to the glass. The bruise on my cheek was no longer the angry, shouting purple of a new wound. It had faded. It was a dull, sickly yellow, the color of old paper, the color of a final invoice. It was not a definition. It was a receipt, proof of payment, a record of a transaction that was, finally, closed. I turned off the light. The door clicked shut behind me. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from, so please comment below, join the conversation, and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, like the video, and give us a little extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.